Hello everyone, FPL Raptor here and welcome back to another video on my YouTube channel. In today's video, I will be previewing double game week 36. As always, I've taken your questions, dilemmas and discussion points from over on Twitter and I will answer them to the best of my ability. We are really at the end of the season now, so every single decision matters. If you are enjoying the content here on this channel, please do remember to like, comment and subscribe. But without further ado, let's jump into today's video. As always, before we jump into the video, I just want to give a massive shout out to Ultimate Champions. Ultimate Champions is live. You can now play Ultimate Champions, as I've said for a while now. Link is in the description. Please do give it a go. It's completely free to play and it massively helps support the channel. And I do actually think this might be the future of fantasy football. It's mixing NFTs or non-fungible tokens with fantasy football. Bit of like FIFA in there, bit of trading cards. Basically, you build the best possible team you can with these cards or NFTs. You can open packs to get more NFTs, or you can just get better rewards by the players that you've got on your starter packs doing well in real life. So there's the opportunity to trade and also just do well via fantasy football. So if you want to give it a go, as you can see on your screen, I am playing this game at the moment. Link in the description will take you there. It's completely free. If you do give it a go, make sure you send me your teams over on Twitter. So guys, as always in these game week preview videos, we'll be covering several topics. So if you want to use the timestamps down below or the chapters, you can do if you don't have time to watch the entire video. So do check those out. But hopefully you follow the entire video and get a lot of help from it. The first thing that was asked by a lot of people is, what do we do about Heung-min Son? Now, he's been smashing it for weeks and weeks. He did blank 2 games in a row recently, but outside of that, he's been scoring a ridiculous amount of points. And a lot of people either just haven't moved on Son because they own Kane. Maybe they sold Son at the start of the blanks and it looked like it was a good decision. So actually, not as many people as you would think do own Son in the top 10k. You can see 26.2% across the entire game really isn't that many. And in the top 10k, it was about sort of 60% effective ownership for game week 35. So a lot of people are thinking, is it worth going for Son with the double that Tottenham have coming up and with the fixtures they've got? Should we move on him now? Should we wait until 37, 38? Should we move from Kane to Son? So I'm going to try and answer some of those questions and take a little bit of a look at Son's underlying statistics. So for the fixtures, yes, I don't think the double's very good at all, and I think there are a lot of other teams that I would prefer to have players from for game week 36. That being said, I would back Spurs to get maybe 2 or 3 goals in this double. Maybe you could see them grabbing a goal or 2 against Liverpool. And then against Arsenal, whilst Arsenal have tightened up a little bit across the last couple, they still don't look great in midfield. They look a little bit weak, obviously, with the absence of Thomas Partey. Even though Tavares has been very good going forward, they still look a little bit weak in left back. And I just think they are prone to conceding quite a few chances. So this doesn't look like a good double game week at all for Spurs defenders. But for the attackers, for Son and Kane, you really wouldn't put it past them grabbing a couple of goals there. And then where they really come into their own is for game week 37 and game week 38, they are serious captaincy options. Obviously, in 37, there are a lot of like Aston Villa, Crystal Palace, and Everton players that you might want to captain outside of that. Salah's still a decent option, but that fixture in 38 really does look like it needs a Spurs player for captaincy, unless you want to go really, really ultra differential for the final game week. So I think the fixtures are there essentially for Spurs. I wouldn't get too put off by game week 36. That being said, I do think you could potentially, if you wanted to, keep whoever you've got in that spot. Maybe wait there. If it's Kane and you don't want to make the switch, I think that's fine. And then maybe look to make the switch in 37 or 38 if you want to. The other stuff that I've got on the screen here is actually the underlying statistics for Heung-min Son over the last 6 and then across the season as well. What I've done is I've basically excluded all of the players that haven't played a lot of minutes and tend to come on as substitutes. And then I've got his ranking in the Premier League for that specific underlying statistic. So to put this into perspective, minutes per expected goal involvement across the last 6 for Son is 128.4, which is pretty good. That's actually the 11th best in the Premier League over that period, again, for players that have played around 40 minutes per game. So 11th is decent, but it does show you that even across the last 6, he's been good, but he hasn't been one of the best in the Premier League. And then he's 15th across the season at 151.2. So again, Son is continuing to put up consistently good underlying numbers. As you can see, across the season and across the last 6, he's been very good. There's definitely been a notable improvement across the last 6, but he's still not up there with the likes of Gabriel Jesus at the moment or Salah across the season. Even Kane across the season, Kane slightly higher. More recently, Son slightly higher. But the thing is with Son, and I want to address this pretty quickly early on in this, is that he is an incredible elite finisher. And we've seen there's loads of statistics going around at the moment. I posted about it on Twitter yesterday. He is a very clinical finisher, and he's actually finishing around 25% of his shots. He's got one of the highest conversion rates in world football. Across the last few years, he's got the highest conversion rate in world football. The only players that really compete with him are the likes of Haaland in more recent years and then Messi across sort of the last 5 and 10 years. So Son doesn't need to have the best expected goal involvement. As long as he's got a good one, he tends to overperform that. So still very good underlying stats for Son. When you look at non-penalty expected goal involvement, which again takes penalties out of the equation, he's a little bit higher because it removes some of those players that have inflated stats via penalties. Of course, Son doesn't take penalties. So at 0.7 non-penalty expecting goal involvement over the last 6, that does put him 8th in the Premier League. Expected FPL points over the last 6, he is 2nd in the league at 7.58. I believe it's only Mahrez is slightly higher. Oh, Gabriel Jesus is one of the City midfielders, is the only one that's slightly higher than him there. Across the season, he's 18th, which again isn't that fantastic, but puts him up there with most of the other very good players. Expected goal involvement delta per 90. So this gives you a bit of an example about overperformance. So essentially what it is goals and assists minus their expected goals and assists. So again, it gives you a bit of an idea. If it's a positive number, they are overperforming their expected data. Across the last 6, Son is 1st in the Premier League. So he's overperforming by the most out of all players in the Premier League over the last 6 at positive 1.05. Across the season, he's 8th at plus 0.28 per 90, which again is still right up there with most of the best finishers in the league. And if we're looking at total rather than per 90 statistics, total expected goal involvement delta across the season, again, he is top at over 8. So he's been overperforming his expected goal involvement by over 8 returns this season. So again, this isn't a fluke with Son, and some players you might say it's a fluke, but he is a consistent overperformer of his underlying statistics. And I do think that I've made a mistake this season of looking at Son's data and going, maybe it's not that good. Son's performing well, but he's around 10th in the Premier League. But when you look at how well he performs, if he's 10th, that would normally put his actual goals and returns in the top sort of 5 or 3 players. So I think I've made a mistake, and I like to admit when I've made mistakes this season. Maybe looking too much at expected data for a finisher like Son, who has consistently shown he can outperform those stats. And then just big chances per 90. He's getting a lot of big chances per 90 over the last 6 as well. He's getting 1.05 per 90. He's getting a big chance every game, puts him 4th in the Premier League, and he's getting 0.78 across the season. So putting all this together, Son's not essential, but he's a fantastic option. If you've got free transfers or an easy route to Son, I absolutely love it. What I would say, and maybe to justify why I'm potentially not looking to go for him straight away, is you're probably not going to gain many points from Son unless you plan on captaining him this week or maybe in 37. The reason I say that is, again, he's around sort of 50-60% effective ownership at most of the top ranks. I think a lot of people are going to bring him in this week as a result of his recent performances. That could then boost up to about 70-75%, maybe slightly lower because not many people will be captaining him. But what that means is you're probably only going to gain around 20-25% of Son's points. What I would say is that's still great. If he scores 20-25 points in the double, gaining 20% of that is still a great thing to have in your team. And the other way of framing this is that if you don't bring him in and he scores 20-25 points, you're losing 75% of that on top of whatever your team's already doing. So essentially, you're going to lose out by quite a few points if he does well. So I guess for bringing in Son, what I would say is he's a fantastic option. The underlying statistics are great, and he's consistently showing he can outperform the underlying statistics as well. But maybe it's a slightly more protective move than it is a real rank gainer. So if you're really far, for example, I'm 56 points off the top 10k. If I really want the top 10k, I'm probably not going to gain much by bringing Son in. But what I would say is if I don't bring him in and he continues to perform at this rate, I could drop out of the top 50k, maybe towards the top 100. So, like I said, bit of a protective move. He's a fantastic option. Let me know down below. Did you own Son for that massive 19-point haul? Did you captain him for that 38-pointer? And did you also captain him a few weeks back for that 21-pointer as well? If you did, you're looking at 42 points plus a 38-pointer in the space of a few weeks for Son when someone like me didn't own him at all. Another question I got by quite a few people is about Salah. Number one, can we sell Salah? Can we captain outside of Salah? Is the risk still there that it was earlier on in the season? And is it going to destroy our seasons if we don't captain him? So, of course, every single week, he's going to have a very high percentage ownership. So if you don't follow effective ownership, what this essentially tells us is if a player's above 100% effective ownership, it means that a lot of players own them, a lot of managers own them, and a lot of managers have also captained them. And if I own Salah in my team and he's above 100% effective ownership, I can still lose rank when he does well, which is a really difficult concept to wrap your head around when you first get introduced to it. So don't worry if you're not quite sure on that. But what this essentially means is if you own Salah, he's still probably going to lose you rank if he does well because so many people own him and so many people have captained him. So the question always comes, do you just go for the safe captaincy pick. Captain Salah because it means you'll still gain points when he does well, and try and find differentials elsewhere to boost your rank? Or do you just look at that as a big opportunity? If loads of people in the game own him, loads of people in the game are captaining him, can we, number one, potentially not captain him and potentially go one step further and even sell him? So for me, I wouldn't be selling Salah. If you look at the underlying statistics across the season, if you look at the algorithm predictions on Fix, Scout, FPL Review, whatever it may be that you're using, he is coming up on top for absolutely everything. So I wouldn't say he's the most valuable player because he's so expensive, but total points expected, I would expect him to get quite a few points over the remainder of the season. And we know how explosive he can be. Just a few weeks ago, getting that 19-pointer against Manchester United, getting 24 points earlier on in the season as well. He's got that in his locker. For me, he's not a sell. I do think you can look to captain elsewhere, but there are a few things that I would personally be thinking about before I made that decision. So the first thing is you need to pick your battles. How many differentials do you already have in your team? If you've already got a really differential team, and by that I mean maybe about 30% and above, I would say probably isn't differential. But if you've got maybe 4 or 5 below 30% effective ownership players in your starting 11 already, and some players like Alonso could still be considered differential, the likes of Sterling, Mahrez, Foden, these are all probably differentials. If you've got enough of those, you probably don't have to look elsewhere outside of Salah as another way to try and gain rank. Because if 2 or 3 of those differentials score 15 points, that's going to give you enough of a boost. So try and see if there's a way to make up the ground with slightly smaller risk alternatives as a first port of call. Personally, that's what I would be doing. Because it might be that you can still captain Salah, be fairly safe. He's a really good option. And you're not just captaining because of the ownership. You're captaining because he is such a great FPL option. And then maybe look to find the rank elsewhere. The second thing to note is if you do decide to captain outside of Salah, that doesn't mean you need to go absolutely insane with your decision. Going different doesn't mean you need to absolutely lose your cool. So captaining a player such as Son, Kane, De Bruyne is enough. Cancelo. It doesn't mean that all of a sudden if you're not captaining Salah, you need to go out there and captain someone like Matty Cash in the double. It doesn't need to go that far. So I think if you're going to try and differentiate, still pick a player that across the season has shown that they can return consistently. They're fairly nailed on to start, and they do have that explosive ability in them as well. So, I mean, I captained Sterling last week. I don't think you need to go that differential if you don't go for Salah, but there are some other good options in Double Game Week 36 that I think you can go for. Just don't lose your call with your decisions. It doesn't mean just because you're differentiating that you need to differentiate completely. The third point, and this is more of a psychological point, and some people say that you shouldn't bring emotions into the game, but I think that anyone that says that they play FPL without emotion involved is either lying or they just don't play it with much intensity, because I think everyone that's watching this video will know FPL can get the better of you. And I'll be honest, recently I've been really struggling to make my way up the ranks, and I don't really get flustered by FPL, but it does hurt. And when you put so much time into a decision, you really expect it to pay off. You spent weeks or hours researching all of these different options, hours making these videos for you guys, coming up with all of these possible combinations of players, and when that team doesn't do well, it can hurt. So what you need to consider is, how is it going to emotionally affect you if Salah pulls a 25-30 pointer out the bag in game week 36? Because that is 100% a possibility. Villa and Tottenham are not particularly difficult games. They're both showing fairly good defensive data, but you could easily see Salah getting 1 or 2 penalties, the odd assist, and then 1 goal, and then you're looking, like I said, at 20 plus points. Is a 20-pointer for Salah at 130% effective ownership going to affect you so much that it's not worth the risk? So you need to think about how much you can deal with this, and this is an important factor to consider in FPL. If you're someone that, throwing it back to game week 9, you captain Havertz rather than Salah, and that massively affected you for weeks, it's probably just not worth it. Like I said, find differentials elsewhere. Bring in someone that's an absolutely crazy option and just play them rather than changing the captaincy too much. And then number 4 is be realistic. In my opinion, Salah is the best asset in the game still, and he is probably the best captaincy option for the upcoming game week, or at least one of the best. A chance of a haul is very, very likely. So linked to point 3, you can't be shocked if Salah gets 20 points. You can't start complaining and beating yourself up and saying, oh, I should have known. Of course you should have known. Salah's a fantastic option. If you're captaining someone else, you need to be realistic about what you're expecting from Salah and from that player as well. It is a risk. For example, this week, I captained Sterling rather than Son. If you've been watching my content, I've been guaranteeing you all week, Son is the best captaincy option. In my opinion, I would captain Son, or I've just said Kane as well. I would captain one of the Spurs players if I owned them. I've been saying that all week. I knew that going for Sterling and not owning Son and Kane and not captaining them was a big risk, and therefore it didn't really hurt that much because I knew it was going to happen. I knew that Son and Kane were good options. So you've almost betting against something that is a very likely opportunity to happen. So putting all of that together, no, I don't think it's completely crazy to captain outside of Salah. I personally wouldn't sell him. I guess what you could say is if he's 13.3 million or whatever he is now, if you're not going to captain him, Could you get away with selling him? Potentially. But again, at least if you own him, if he does go crazy, you're not going to lose as much rank. The final thing to say specifically for Game Week 36 is, like I said, the defensive data for Spurs and Villa actually isn't that bad at all. Villa in particular have shown really good defensive data recently, and Spurs across the season and over the last 6 to 10 game weeks have been in the top 4 or top 6 defenses. So Liverpool are amazing. Salah's recently had a rest, and Salah's still got the best underlying data in the league by some distance. That being said, he's playing against 2 decent defenses. So I don't think it's likely that we'll see what we saw in Game Week 26 with Salah. I don't think we're going to see a 25 to 30 pointer. But what I think you've got with Salah is a very high likelihood of 1 or 2 attacking returns. And I don't think you get that with many other options. So let me know down below. Are you just going to play safe with Salah and captain probably the best player in FPL, not only this season, but in recent seasons as well? Or are you looking at a potential differential? If you are looking at a differential captaincy for 36, do let me know down below who you're considering. If I were to look at my team and try and think of someone that I would captain, it would either be Cancelo, who I already own. I think he's got a decent chance for clean sheet or attacking return. Or I would be looking to bring in and captain Kevin De Bruyne, because I think he's likely to play both and he's got that same explosive ability and also some consistent attacking returns as well. So we did discuss this a few weeks ago, so I'm not going to discuss it in too much detail here. But again, it was one of the most highly requested questions. So I did want to just readdress it because there have been a couple of changes recently. And it's the best strikers. And we're looking here at data across the last 6 rather than the last season. I think as you approach the back end of the season, there are some changes in form, motivation, underlying statistics, which players are playing, which players are being rotated. So I think specifically at the end of the season, I do like to change it up a little bit and look at slightly smaller sample sizes here. And I think a lot of people are potentially looking at bench boosting or just looking at doublets for either 36 or 37 for the back end of the season. So here are, in my opinion, the best strikers looking at that cheaper price. Of course, Kane continues to be a decent option, although maybe not justifying the price tag. And what I would say is didn't quite squeeze in here just because of his price, but Gabriel Jesus is actually putting up the best underlying statistics in every category over the last 6 game weeks. So he's beating Salah, Son, Kane, whoever you name in the Premier League. Jesus is above all of them. That is skewed by, obviously, the game against Watford. But regardless, if you expect Jesus to continue to start, he could be a fantastic option. At that cheaper price, you've got Rodriguez, Mateta, João Pedro, maybe Nketiah you put into that bracket there. It really does depend on if you've got a free hit left, and if not, are you bench boosting maybe in 36? If you're bench boosting in 36, you maybe don't want to go for the likes of Rodriguez and Mateta. And equally, if you're free hitting in 37, again, Rodriguez and Mateta lose their value because that's the week that you would really want them. If you're bench boosting in 36 or you need a striker for 36, of course, João Pedro, Nketiah, Dennis, Pukki, these guys here, the ones that double in 36 are going to be really important options for you. So almost more than the underlying statistics for me, it does come down to what chips you've got left and when you plan on playing them. But let's look at the underlying statistics regardless. João Pedro and Dennis just aren't options for me. All season long, they've been putting up really poor underlying statistics. Recently, there's been a slight improvement for João Pedro, but look, you're still looking at a 0.24 non-penalty expected goal involvement. As we're going to discuss later on in the video, Tavares has a better expected goal involvement than João Pedro and Dennis. They're just not putting up underlying statistics to suggest that they'll score goals. I guess in a double game week, especially I think it's Crystal Palace and Everton they've got, it's a really good double. So I guess you could just take a punt on them and then bench them for the remainder of the season. But again, similar to what I said before, you can't blame yourself or complain if João Pedro and Dennis don't do well. You're not expecting them to do well with the underlying statistics you've got there. Their expected goal involvement suggests that they'll get you an expected FPL return every 4 games. So in a double game week, it's very realistic that they won't get you anything. So that's something you do need to consider, but they are fairly cheap. And like I said, they do have a good double. So they are options, I guess. But for me, I would prefer Nketiah, Mateta or Rodriguez. All 3 of them are putting up really good data. Rodriguez continues to show really good underlying data. Of course, the issue with Rodriguez is that he is injured and he is flagged. And also Vidra has been really, really good recently, and so has Weghorst. So it could be quite easily that Burnley play a front 2 of Weghorst and Vidra if Rodriguez is out. And even if Rodriguez isn't out, if they just want to give him a bit of a rest, they can mix it up. So maybe that would put me off Rodriguez. You could take a punt on Vidra. You could go all the way to £6.4 million Weghorst. But I think looking at the price of some of the other options and also when they double and the fixtures that they've got, maybe I'd prefer to go for some of the other options. So I think really at that cheaper price, for me, it would be Nketiah or Mateta. The fact that Mateta is a slight rotation risk and that he can potentially be dropped in that front 4 for Crystal Palace, as a lot of players can, even the likes of Zaha, I think it does come down to Nketiah for me. And yes, Nketiah is a slight risk with Lacazette as well. But realistically, with all of these cheap strikers, they're cheap for a reason because they started off not being in the team. They've made their way into the team, but that doesn't mean that they'll keep their place. So for me, Nketiah is the one to go for. Outside of that, I think there is justification to go for Dennis, João Pedro, Mateta, Rodriguez if you want to. But for me, they're either a rotation risk or their underlying data is just not good enough. You've then got Pukki, which I'd say is probably in between the two sets of strikers with respect to prices. Still putting up amazing data. 0.67 non-penalty expected goal involvement. Minutes per XGI, 136. So he's basically got the joint best underlying statistics on this list, depending on what underlying data you're looking at here. And he's projected to get the third or fourth highest projected points over the final 3 game weeks on this list. Of course, has a really nice double in 36 as well. The slight issue, I suppose, with Pukki is that Norwich have now been relegated. So will they rotate a little bit? Will they show any fight now that they've got nothing left to play for? For me, I'm not that put off by it. If they want to show a little fight, to be honest, they were probably relegated about 10 game weeks ago, and they were almost definitely relegated about 2 or 3 game weeks ago. And in that time, Pukki's still putting up really good data. So unless you expect Pukki to suddenly be rotated, which I would hope that he still isn't, because they probably still want him firing to either sell him for as much money as possible or to have him firing back in the Championship, I think they'll still continue to play him. This might actually relieve a bit of pressure from them, and they might start to perform. So it's a bit of narrative bias there, but this wouldn't put me off Pukki. But maybe it would make me look elsewhere if there were some 50-50 calls. And then it comes down to Watkins and Richarlison, and I think they're both fantastic options. Of course, it's worth keeping an eye on 2 things with Richarlison. The first being that he has picked up a slight knock at the end of the Chelsea game, although it looked like he was fine on the touchline at the end of the game. And then the second thing to note is that he did throw that flare back into the crowd. And there's talk of a potential 3-game ban. Now, what I would say is there was lots of talk about Ronaldo getting banned for slapping the phone out of the kid's hand. Nothing happened with that. There have been various times this season with Premier League players supposedly looking like they're going to get a ban. And with that sort of thing, I could quite easily see there being no ban. Equally, do keep an eye on it. Don't make an early transfer for Richarlison. You need to wait to find out, because if he is banned, it could be as many as 3 games, which means he'll probably be out for the remainder of the season. So keep an eye on that. Hopefully, we'll have some good understanding of what will happen soon. And if he is fit, in my opinion, if he's fit, firing, and he's not banned, in my opinion, Richarlison's the best player on this list. As you can see, 0.61 non-pen expected goal involvement per 90. You can see minutes per expected goal involvement, 102.9. It's the best on the list. Projected points via FPL review, he is the highest, and also has the second best fixtures on this list in doubles in 36 and 37. For me, Richarlison is the player to own, and of course, I haven't even discussed the fact that he does have penalties on top of this as well. Hence why his minutes per expected goal involvement is so much better than Pukki's, whereas his non-penalty expected goal involvement isn't. So putting this all together, I think if I had to pick 3 players at the moment, you probably didn't need me to show you the statistics to tell you this, it would be Richarlison, Watkins and Nketiah. If I had to prioritise one this week, it would probably be Richarlison for me, but I equally think that Watkins and Nketiah are fine options as well. I suppose the most nailed on 2 options are Watkins and Richarlison, again, assuming that Richarlison is fine with respect to his injury and the ban as well. Let me know down below, which strikers are you considering? Do you own any of these already? I myself own Pukki and Watkins at the moment, and I'm looking to bring in Richarlison to make it a front 3 of the 3 most expensive ones on here, Pukki, Watkins and Richarlison. But do let me know down below what your thoughts are. So the next set of questions were all around which players are likely to miss a game in game week 36, and as a result go from what is a double game week to essentially a single game week. And I'll start by just caveating this and saying pretty much everyone, and this is always the case for double game week. We've seen it in the past, players that you just don't expect either pick up an injury in the first game, or we just see rotation in the second one. For example, Salah picking up an injury in game week 29 was an example of how bad it can go, where your player gets injured for the second one. And equally, we also saw him just getting a random rest in game week 35 when not many people predicted it. So there's always the potential for players that look very nailed on. I'll talk about Che Adams from game week 33, when I said he's the most nailed on striker you could possibly get for your free hit, and he missed both games. It happens, and especially as we enter the back end of the season, it's even more likely. So what I would start by saying is don't stress about the players you own necessarily, and don't suddenly start shipping them out because you think they're going to miss a game, because it's very likely that the player you bring in will also miss one of the 2 games in the double. That being said, you maybe don't want to necessarily take a -8 or a -12 for a player that you desperately want to get in if you think there's a good chance that they miss the second game. So, firstly, Chelsea assets, very likely to be rotated for their second fixture of game week 36 against Leeds. The reason for that is that the FA Cup final is only a few days after their fixture against Leeds. I think probably Havertz and James are the 2 that I would be very worried about. Obviously, James just... We've spoken about before with Tuchel, said that he's struggling with like the physical load. That's why he's been playing at right centre-back. Also, they have players that can play at right wing-back and right centre-back, whereas with someone like Marcos Alonso, they've got less players that can play in that left wing-back role. So I think there's more chance that James misses out. And similarly with Havertz, they've got Ziyech, they've got Pulisic, they've got Lukaku, they've got various players that can fill in with that front 3. I do think that Mason Mount is just a more integral part to that Chelsea attack. So I think all of them could potentially be rotated in either the Wolves game or the Leeds game. But for me, I'd be very worried in particular about the Leeds game, and even more so about James and Havertz. The second one, this is a slight worry, but just something to keep your eye on. At the time of the watching issue, you might already know this, but Robertson looks like he might be due a rest. So I can't remember Klopp's exact quote, but it was along the lines of Tsimikas could have quite easily come in for Robertson to give him a rest. So he was saying that he would have liked to bring Tsimikas in for Robertson to give him a rest, but he'd already changed, I think, 2 players in the midfield and Trent. So what he was essentially saying is Tsimikas was ready, Robertson needs a rest at some point, but we already changed out Trent and a couple of other players, and it probably didn't make sense to make too many wholesale changes in what was a difficult game anyway. So I have sort of paraphrased what he said there. I'll try and find the quote, maybe flash it up on the screen. But essentially, I think if Robertson doesn't miss out against Villarreal, and there's a possibility he does in the second leg of the Champions League, or he just doesn't come off early, I think there's a very good chance he misses the Villa game in the double game week there, because I think he's almost definitely going to play against Tottenham, and he's made it very clear, Klopp, that Robertson's due a rest and that Tsimikas is ready. So for me, I would be very worried if he doesn't, if he plays sort of 70, 80, 90 minutes against Villarreal, I'd be kind of worried. I wouldn't sell him. And if you're desperate to get him in anyway, maybe go for it. But if you're taking a -8 to bring in Robertson, I would be slightly worried. Let's wait for the Champions League. It might be that he misses out. It might be that he comes off early for Tsimikas. And if that is the case, I'd expect him to start the remainder of the games this season. Again, as we've said for a while now, all Leicester players are at risk. And this is the main reason that I haven't been moving for any, despite the fact that their fixtures are great. And I do really want to own the likes of Maddison. It's just so difficult to predict. Again, let's see on Thursday how far they go, if it goes to extra time, etc., how many minutes each of them play. Maddison's, of course, an injury doubt anyway. It looks like he's aggravated his hip injury. So for me, I'm just going to avoid all Leicester players. Apart from Schmeichel, who looks like he's the only nailed on one, they seem to just switch their entire back four out repeatedly. Maddison and Barnes are coming in and out. Maddison's obviously got the injury worry. Jamie Vardy looks like he's back, but again, how long will that last? Dakar, Iheanacho, they've got so many options that for me, it's just not worth it. I don't mind KDH if you do really want a second player, as we'll discuss a bit later on in the video. So for me, avoid Leicester players. And then finally, Man City players, for similar reasons, they've obviously got the Champions League as well. So that's a worry. If they go 120 minutes against Real Madrid, then again, Foden and KDB, if they play 120 minutes, are they then going to play both games in the double as well? We just don't know. And I would be slightly worried, I suppose, about Laporte. Slightly less than maybe Foden, KDB, Mahrez, Sterling, etc. But with Laporte, now that they've got Ake and Diaz and Zinchenko available, they could easily play a back four of Cancelo, Diaz, Ake and Zinchenko. The reason I would be slightly more worried about Laporte is that Diaz was injured, and therefore, whilst his injury might not be ready to play this amount of games, he should be fairly fit and refreshed. And Laporte has played a lot of minutes due to injuries to other players in their defence. So you can see that list at the bottom. These are just some of the popular players that I would be slightly worried about. But again, I'm not going to sell these players. It would maybe make me just question taking too many hits for some of these players because they've got an amazing double when maybe we wouldn't expect them to double as a result. So let me know down below, which players do you think are at slight risk? There are more players than this, but these are some of the popular players, I guess, from the main teams in Liverpool, City and Chelsea. But let me know down below who you think are the major rotation risks. So we've just got some budget enablers now. Again, data from the last 6 matches, similar table to as we had earlier, but this is excluding strikers and talking about the cheapest possible options that we've got in the defence and the midfield. Just in case you're trying to flesh out those squads for a bench boost, or potentially you're just looking to downgrade to try and fit a Son in, or a Salah, or a Kevin De Bruyne, and maybe you just want to go for a player that, yes, doubles and is cheap, but also is going to play both games, or has a very good chance of playing both games. Again, it's very difficult to try and predict which of these players will actually play both games, but here are 8 options that I think are very cheap and have a good chance of being decent options for the back end of the season. So the 4 defenders that I've got in here are Holgate, Tavares, Klein and Sessegnon. To be honest, they're all very cheap for a reason. They've all got risks associated with them, and I don't think any of these 4 are completely nailed. I'd probably say that Nathaniel Klein's the most nailed, and I think he started something like 12 games in a row and played 90 minutes in a row in all of them. So Klein's probably the most nailed on, but as you can see, also got very low attacking threat, and same with Holgate, but Holgate's even less nailed than Klein. So yes, you get the extra double with Holgate, but he's not 100% nailed, and recently he did miss 2 games in a row. So I would be slightly worried about Holgate, but I would expect that both Holgate and Klein will play the remainder of the games for their teams. And whilst you're not getting much attacking output from them, you've got the possibility of clean sheets with some decent fixtures in there. So if you're really stuck for a spot and you don't like the other 2 options, I don't mind Holgate and Klein. And then I think the 2 slightly more exciting options are the 2 left backs, Tavares and Sessegnon, playing for Arsenal and Spurs. Of course, both have double game week 36, and then after that have decent fixtures in 37 and 38. For me, just due to the underlying data and due to the fact that I think anyway, he passes the eye test slightly more for me from an attacking perspective, I'd probably lean towards Tavares. As you can see here, he's actually got really good underlying data. So he's got 0.32 non-penalty expected goal involvement per 90 over the last 6. Minutes per expected goal involvement is 280.6, which puts him level with Gray and slightly better than Dewsbury Hall, much better than Sessegnon and the other defenders. So he's got really good attacking threat, Tavares. And again, not great defensively, but if you expect him to keep his place in the starting 11, if you don't expect Cedric to maybe fill in at left back occasionally or Xhaka to drop back in there, I think Tavares is probably the best budget enabler to have in defence at the moment. Sessegnon's a decent option, assuming that Reguilon isn't fit for the remainder of the season, which doesn't look like he's going to be. Assuming, again, Doherty's not back. Assuming that he sticks with that left back spot, I think he's probably a very good option as well, but this data would suggest that he's not got that much attacking output in comparison to Tavares. With respect to the 4 midfielders that I think are really good budget options, 3 of them are very good, very obvious options. We've got Dewsbury Hall, Gordon, and Ramsey, not to be mistaken with Gordon Ramsey, as I keep saying in my past videos. So we've got KDH, Gordon, and Ramsey. I think all 3 of them are absolutely fantastic options. For me, Gordon is the standout budget enabler across every position, every price point for Bench Boost 36, and also for Game Week 37 as well. As you can see here, non-penalty expected goal involvement at 0.5, 182.9 minutes per expected goal involvement. It's almost as good as Son across the season, which is really good. 16.7 projected points puts him top of the list as well. And like I've said for a while now, Everton have the best double-double, in my opinion, out of Villa, Leicester, and Everton. So Gordon, for me, is the man to go for it if you've got the budget to do so. I don't mind KDH at 4.4 million, but again, he's a slight rotation risk with the fact that Leicester are prioritising the Europa Conference League, depending how far they go. He did just get a rest in 35, though, so I do think that KDH will play every game for the remainder of the season. And then I think Ramsey's a fine option as well. Slightly better data than KDH, but of course, £0.3 million more expensive. So take that as you will, but 262.1 minutes per expected goal involvement puts him second on this list. So I do really like him as an option as well. And then just as a sort of a fourth and final option, slightly more expensive, but I really quite like Damari Gray at the moment. He's starting most of the games for Everton, passing the eye test, and with Everton having everything to play for, I think Lampard will stick with the team that beat Chelsea and stick with the team that did well for him. And I just think that they're clicking at the moment in that attack. So I think Damari Gray should continue to start. He's a slightly riskier option than Gordon, and his underlying data is not any better than Gordon either. So for me, I would prioritise Gordon, but if you want a real differential or you want a double up alongside Gordon and you don't fancy KDH or Ramsey, I don't mind Damari Gray. Let me know down below, both in defence, midfield and attack, who are some of the budget options that you're looking at for your, maybe for your bench boost, but outside of that, just options for your team as well. So guys, there you have it. That is my Game Week 36 preview video done and dusted. Only 2 more Game Week preview videos after this for Game Week 37 and Game Week 38. I've loved making these all season. And if these videos have been useful for you, let me know down below. And also make sure to like, comment, and subscribe as well. As I said, those 3 things massively help support the channel. And if you want to support the channel above and beyond that, you can either join the Patreon, become a YouTube member. Both those links are in the description. And for free, just give Ultimate Champions a go. Like I said, link in the description. It's a track link, so click on that. It will help support the channel. And also, I think it is a pretty cool game to give a go. The next video will be my team selection video on Thursday, guys, and then I have a deadline stream on Saturday afternoon because the deadline is slightly later than normal. So if you're excited for those 2 bits of content, do make sure to subscribe. Until next time, thank you so much for watching. Cheers. Bye-bye.